In 2077, what makes someone a criminal? Well, releasing an unfinished game. So, all jokes and cheap gags aside, what do I actually think of Cyberpunk 2077? Well, it's a bit more complicated than one might think, because this is a game I can 100% recommend people just go out and get, because there is clear love and talent poured into this at every orifice it has. But that being said, it should have been delayed at least once or twice more, because there are far, far too many bugs in this thing to be worth the $60 asking price. However, if you are okay with something like Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas, and you're okay with that level of bugs, this is a 100% yes, go out and get it. It is wonderful. You're going to fall in love with this one. Okay, so I'm going to break this video up into parts. There will be my initial reactions, my main, the middle of the game reactions, as well as my thoughts on the ending stuff. But I will not really spoil the story any more than the opening first act, because I feel like that's something kind of needs to be spoiled, because you could see it coming from a mile away, if we're being entirely honest. But I want to give you my thoughts on that, and towards the end game is when I'm really going to start talking about spoilery stuff, so I'll put up a time mark when we get there of when to skip to. Alright, so let's not pretend there isn't a major elephant in the room. What system did I play Cyberpunk 2077 on? Well, I played it on a base model PS4, simply because that's the console I have, and it's impossible to get your hands on a PS5 these days for whatever reason. But I was aware when jumping into it of the bugs, but I wasn't aware to what extent. Now, I will say this, the PS4 version is not exactly optimized for the system. However, what I have heard is that if you play a PS4 copy on the PS5, it is actually a lot better optimized and runs quite a bit better. I'm not entirely sure of the reason for this, but I believe it has to do with ray tracing and all that not wanting to work with the PS4, but working with the PS5. The next thing I want to touch on is I want to touch on the story before I get into the gameplay, so if you wish to skip ahead and avoid story spoilers, skip to this time right here. I'll wait. Okay, so anyway, on to where the story is. Okay, so as far as Act 1 goes, Cyberpunk does not start out the greatest. It drags in Act 1 for some reason until the very end. Now, I think it's the writing, I'm not certain myself, but for some reason, after the first act closes, the game gets so much better. But the first act, at one point, I almost fell asleep because it was just so boring for some reason. And I'm not sure why that is, as you are preparing for a heist, and normally I really love heist movies, but for some reason, I wasn't really feeling it with this one. Now, when you're going through the first act, you will notice several characters, they have the Maze Hughes effect, where they're so wholesome, they're practically, magnetic to the death flags that they are collecting. So, most of the twists of how Act 1 ends, you can call from a mile away. And I'm just going to leave my discussion of Act 1 at that, the first act is not great, and most of the people that I know would play Cyberpunk would drop it before the end of the first act, because the first act is just not good. It's boring. Besides, you don't even meet Keanu Reeves till the second act. Now, as far as gameplay is concerned, I tend to fall into two camps here. There is your main story stuff, and then there is your Johnny Silverhand stuff as far as gameplay goes. Now, the reason I say this is both playstyles are extremely different. So, I'm going to talk about the Johnny Silverhand stuff first, and then I will cut to your actual gameplay as V and what you will be doing most of the time. So, with your Johnny Silverhand stuff, the game turns into a completely different beast from what you would expect. It is not so much, an RPG as much as it is Doom at that point. Because you are given a weapon that can essentially one-shot any enemy so long as you place it right. And you also can't heal, which I'm not sure if you can do in Doom, but it encourages a more fast and brutal playstyle than how it normally does as V. Granted, the controls are the exact same, and you can play V like you play Johnny Silverhand. In fact, I would probably say it's recommended. But for the most part, I found myself, when it came to Johnny Silverhand, being a lot more fast and loose with the gameplay. Now, your gameplay as V is a lot more akin to your traditional RPGs. You walk around the city, you pick up quests, you have text options, and you can essentially roleplay as a few different characters, but when designing your character, you have 3 different backstories, I guess, you can choose from. I mean, I say backstories, they're called, I think, life walks. Basically, you get the choice between a nomad, street kid, and a corpo. Now, I have done 2 playthroughs so far, and I have done both nomad and street kid. So far, street kid has been my favorite, simply because I guess nomad was more me getting used to everything. But after that, you will find yourself in the actual gameplay loop, which the way V is different from Johnny is, number one, you can change your weapons all over the place and you can optimize an outfit. Secondly, you can also upgrade your weapons. This doesn't make too much of a difference. I didn't find myself doing it often, but it is something that you can do. There's also a crafting system, but in my experience, it has never once really been useful. Any weapon that you can craft is always going to be worse than ones you can just pick up off of dead guys, so there is that. One thing you can also do is you can go to Ripper Docks to get, like, these weird arm blade stuffs, as well as just things that will increase your maximum carrying capacity, and all that good stuff. Now, I didn't find the Ripper Dock to be too useful, as their prices are a little extreme and you're not really going to be able to afford much until the mid to late game. But it is an option of ways that you can handle the situation. And speaking of options, I know, fantastic segue, I found that your choices in this game really did not matter as much as they probably should. I will give an example without spoiling any of the base game, but early on in the story you will encounter Evelyn Parker. She makes you a bit of an offer that could be an interesting change-up and potentially has massive story ramifications. Or at least small story ramifications. However, that choice, no matter what you chose, goes absolutely nowhere, as the same thing happens to her, whether you side with her or not. However, to carry over from that, the next thing I want to touch on is you can drive cars in this game, which sounds good at first until you realize how they handle. The vehicles do not handle the greatest, and they take a tiny bit of time to get used to. At most, I'd say they remind me a lot of GTA 4 with how it kind of felt like you were sliding on ice. Like, the vehicles are responsive, don't get me wrong, but they're sliding all over the place. However, each and every one of the cars looks immaculate as far as actual vehicles are concerned. They all look, for the most part, great. But there are a few cars that basically look like normal cars, but with like an antenna on them. It kind of reminds me of the Ratchet and Clank games, with how in every game you would eventually come across a piece of technology that is exactly like what we have in real life, but for some reason there's a like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi antenna on it, and it's really weird. The next thing I wanted to touch on is style in this game, or as it dubs it, street cred. So at first I thought this was going to be like a weird experience system when I first heard about it in the game, but it is not. It is far more like how people would respond to you. Now, and as well as like how much damage you take and all that good stuff. Now, it feels like there should be a system where, depending on what you wear, NPCs will react to you different. In my playthroughs, I have not really noticed anything. They always treat me the exact same. But they do have different effects on like your armor and stuff. So there is that. But one thing I think you might want to remember, because this is kind of odd for me for some reason, like 90% of this game is in first person, and you are almost never going to see your character, so don't spend like too much time designing them to be like exactly like you. It's a bit of a waste of time. Granted, what is here as far as the character creator goes is pretty alright. You got pretty standard stuff. You also have some options that aren't super normal for an RPG, such as you can toggle on and off your cybernetics, and you can toggle different ones to your face. Now, I actually really liked this because, there are some cool cybernetic looking things. Most of what you do in the character creator has absolutely no impact on gameplay. It just doesn't, and So now is basically when I'm going to give you like some of my like overall thoughts on the game, and just any of the other small stuff that I haven't mentioned throughout the video, such as the story and bugs. But don't worry, this stuff will be spoiler free. I'm going to start with the story, so go to this timestamp right here if you don't want to hear me talk about the story like at all and go in completely blind. I'll have another video out in a few days that effectively like sums up my feelings on the story and some more spoilery stuff, but there you go. So click to this timestamp and hope for the best. Okay, so as far as the story goes, I thought the voice acting in it was great. This game is carried by its writing and story, so long as it isn't in the first act, because the first act just drags on and on and on, and it's rather annoying. The next thing I want to touch on is I thought the brain dances were a really like heavy-handed way of letting characters find out what they needed to find out. It's effectively like no different from a character seeing something on a camera footage, except, it's even worse because you have to go through several different layers of audio just to find out what you want. It is cool like the first time you do it, but you do it 3 or 4 times throughout the story, and yeah, it doesn't overstay its welcome too much, but on repeat playthroughs, that will get incredibly annoying. Okay, and after that, I wanted to touch on characters that I just thought were, badly voiced. There's a cop towards the beginning of the game that just, the voice actress, it sounds like, she wasn't given any direction at all. But as far as my boy Keanu goes, he's good, but not as good as his acting career. So I guess it's like first time voice acting things, but it's just, oh boy, is he not in the greatest of roles here. And I found myself actually kind of liking the relationship between, Johnny Silverhand and the main character. I did like that a lot, but I do wish you could have like multiple different kinds of relationship with him, and to some extent you can, except the two that I found so far are either 90s buddy cop film or, get out of my head pill popper type relationship, and it kinda sucks. I kinda wish, like, if you had chosen Street Kid, he would know who, like, Johnny is and be, like, a fanboy or something. I was kinda hoping for that in my second playthrough, but it is kinda whatever. It's not really that important. So now it's basically time for my overall thoughts, and my overall thoughts on this game are, yes, it is a good game. But that being said, it is a game with many, many flaws, and I would wait a couple months to get it. This game will be a different game in a few months if the studio doesn't close compared to what it is right now. Not saying that that is going to happen, but it's a possibility. I have seen studios release much better games than this and in much better shape, and their entire studios get closed. And apparently this was like a major sink on the developers. So if all goes well, in about 6 months, this will be a bug-free game, or at least as close to bug-free as you can get, and it will be great. And I can firmly recommend it. But until that time, until they iron out some of the bugs, I have to say it's good, but it ain't worth $60. So do hold off on your purchase. However, one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you like a fast clip of the kinds of bugs you will more than likely encounter on your playthrough. So, yeah.